The world on the eve of a new world war, extremism, political violence, and the collapse of democratic dialogue. The year 2025 marks a turning point in contemporary world history. Geopolitical tensions have reached critical levels reminiscent of the periods preceding the two world wars, while the social fabric of Western democracies is rapidly deteriorating under the weight of ideological extremism. The brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk on the 10th of September 2025, carried out by elements linked to left-wing extremism, symbolizes the dangerous escalation of political violence threatening to destroy the foundations of Western civilization. Simultaneously, movements such as Black Lives Matter have validated and encouraged violence, irreversibly tarnishing the legitimate struggle for civil rights and contributing to the destructive polarization that fragments democratic societies. This scenario of extreme radicalization, combined with unprecedented geopolitical tensions not seen since 1939, suggests that the world is perilously close to a global conflict of catastrophic proportions. The international landscape of 2025 presents disturbing parallels with the periods preceding the two world wars. Just as in 1914, when a rigid system of alliances transformed a regional incident into a global conflagration, we now observe the formation of antagonistic blocs threatening global stability. The rivalry between the United States and China echoes the Anglo-German naval competition of the early 20th century, while tensions in Eastern Europe recall the Balkan crises that triggered the First World War. The resurgence of aggressive nationalism, the erosion of multilateral institutions, and the progressive collapse of the international order established after 1945 have created a vacuum of global leadership similar to that which characterized the 1930s. Authoritarian states continually test the limits of Western tolerance, while democracies weakened by internal extremism prove incapable of responding with firmness and coherence. Nuclear proliferation, absent in previous wars, adds a dimension of existential risk that renders any future conflict potentially apocalyptic. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, the influential conservative activist and co-founder of Turning Point USA, during an event at Utah Valley University, represents a grim milestone in the deterioration of democratic political dialogue. Kirk's death on the 10th of September 2025 drew renewed attention to the climate of political violence in America, reflecting a significant rise in threats against officials and politicians at both local and federal levels. This heinous crime was not an isolated act of violence, but rather the predictable outcome of incendiary rhetoric promoted by extremist sectors of the left that have systematically dehumanized conservatives and legitimized violence as a political tool. Trump attributed Kirk's death to the radical left, a characterization that, though politically charged, points to the undeniable reality that the escalation of political violence has its roots in the normalization of ideological hatred. Rising polarization and the absence of balanced debate are fueling violence in a nation awash with firearms. Kirk's death illustrates how the systematic destruction of democratic public space, promoted by left-wing extremists, has created an environment in which political assassination becomes a natural extension of ideological confrontation. One of the most dangerous manifestations of contemporary extremism is the way movements ostensibly dedicated to social justice have come to validate and encourage violence. Black Lives Matter's official Instagram account posted a video clip seemingly justifying violence following the 22nd of August murder of a Ukrainian refugee, demonstrating how the organization has abandoned any pretense of peaceful advocacy for civil rights. BLM justified the violence following the stabbing of Irina Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee fatally attacked by DeCarlos Brown, revealing an ideology that prioritizes racial narrative over basic humanity and compassion for innocent victims. This stance represents a fundamental corruption of the original ideals of the civil rights movement, transforming a legitimate cause into a platform for violent extremism. BLM's validation of violence not only irreparably tarnishes the black movement but also provides ideological justification for domestic terrorist acts. When mainstream organizations embrace the rhetoric of justified violence, the conditions are created for radicalized individuals to move from words to action, as evidenced in Charlie Kirk's assassination. Contemporary left-wing extremism is not confined to marginal groups but has penetrated deeply into Western educational, media, and cultural institutions. Universities have become centers of radical indoctrination, where conservative thought is systematically suppressed, and violence against ideological opponents is implicitly encouraged. Progressive media amplify narratives that dehumanize conservatives, creating a climate conducive to political violence. This normalization of extremism undermines the foundations of liberal democracy by eliminating the possibility of peaceful coexistence between differing worldviews. When the radical left labels conservatives as fascists and white supremacists, by definition, any violence against them is automatically justified as anti-fascism or self-defense. This perverse logic transforms political assassination into a form of heroic resistance. The extreme radicalization we observe today echoes the 1930s, when totalitarian movements of both left and right systematically destroyed the democratic center in Europe. Just as German communists inadvertently collaborated with the Nazis by attacking the social democratic democracy, contemporary left-wing extremists weaken liberal democracy through their violence and intolerance. The fragmentation of basic democratic consensus, evidenced by the inability to unanimously condemn political assassination, mirrors the collapse of the Weimar Republic and other European democracies in the 1930s. When societies lose the capacity to distinguish between legitimate dissent and treason, between peaceful protest and domestic terrorism, they approach institutional collapse dangerously closely. The consequences of this extremist escalation extend far beyond American domestic politics. In a world already tense due to geopolitical rivalries, the internal instability of major democracies weakens the West's capacity to respond effectively to external authoritarian threats. Regimes such as China, Russia, and Iran closely observe America's internal fragmentation, calculating that a society divided by political violence will be incapable of sustaining long-term international commitments. Charlie Kirk's death sends a clear message to global authoritarians. Western democracies are consuming themselves from within, becoming easy targets for external manipulation and pressure. This perception of weakness may encourage military adventurism and provocations which, in a world saturated with nuclear weapons, could easily escalate into devastating global conflicts. The assassination of Charlie Kirk marks not merely the death of an individual but symbolizes the death of civilized democratic dialogue in the West. Left-wing extremism, exemplified by Black Lives Matter's validation of violence and the normalization of anti-conservative hatred in progressive institutions, has created conditions that made this crime not only possible but inevitable. The world of 2025 finds itself at a historical crossroads comparable to the years preceding the two world wars. The combination of extreme geopolitical tensions, internal ideological radicalization, and the collapse of democratic institutions creates an environment ripe for global catastrophe. The fundamental difference is that a contemporary conflict would be fought with weapons capable of extinguishing human civilization. Preventing this imminent catastrophe requires an honest recognition that left-wing extremism represents an existential threat to liberal democracy comparable to or exceeding right-wing extremism. As long as democratic societies continue to deny this reality, legitimize progressive violence, and treat conservatives as internal enemies, the path to civil war and eventually to world war will remain open. The time for fundamental change is rapidly running out. History will judge harshly those who, through intellectual cowardice or ideological complicity, failed to confront the extremism destroying the foundations of Western civilization. Charlie Kirk died defending democratic values. His death must serve as a final wake-up call before it is too late to save both democracy and world peace.